Number 3 is done. Rotate the engine 180 degrees again, which will put the cam up mark upside down. And then do number 4 all the way at the end there, distributor, those 4 valves. And finally I'll rotate the motor another 180 degrees, which will put the up mark level with the head pointing toward the intake. Just be sure that you're not making the filler gauges grip so hard that you're tearing the filler gauge up. They should slide in there with very little resistance if you're going at it straight on. But if you get it at an angle, it's going to be not right. It's got to go square with it, and it'll look good. It'll run good. And again, I'll be turning the motor counterclockwise. If you've acquired new valve cover gaskets and seals, you'll be needing to use a seal puller or equivalent and get underneath the seals and pop them up out of there. All 4 of them run the spark plug tubes. And let's come all out. Clean and wash out the valve cover and degrease the holes in this track for the new seal to lay in. And you can even push out the bolts and change your rubber grommets under them as well. I'm taking like a 30mm 12-point half-inch drive socket and just kind of knocking the seals back down into their holes. And I've laid the new outer seal in there. It has a wider hole in one end and a narrower hole in the other for the cam bearings, plus 2 little squigglies right there down from the oil cap. And the block's degreased. And on the cam corners, the cam bearing corners, I'll be applying silicone at all 4 points here, here, and there, and that should be all the silicone you need. And you can put the heater hose and the coolant temperature sensors, plug those back in, get that heater hose back on there, and go ahead and put the one back on the thermostat housing back there. If it looks good, go ahead and roll the motor to top dead center with this up mark pointing at 12 o'clock and the timing mark line on top dead center on the cover. Put a new O-ring on the distributor and insert it. And tighten the bolts down to 17 foot-pounds. Just line the blades up with a slot in the camshaft. And the distributor, it may or may not put up a little bit of fight. You can always take the cap off and spin the rotor button by hand, but I don't want to disturb the cap on it. And set the distributor with the mark you made before it started. And I should be done with that. Plug the distributor back in. And once you're sure you're done with the belt and stuff, go ahead and stick this timing cover back in there. Goes underneath the wire harness in the back. And put the 3 bolts in it. They tighten down to about 8 foot-pounds. I'll be leaving this one off. I've applied a dab of silicone in all 4 corners where the cam bearing meets the head. And the deck's degreased. There's all the lock nuts are tightened down. All the cam bearing bolts are tightened down. There's no dirt laying in there. And I should conclude the valve fan cover part and the workings in there. You could drizzle a little bit of oil down through here if you wanted to, but just don't get it on the head cover sealing area. Feel free to install your new NGK spark plugs and put the plug wires back down in there at any time. I installed a new manifold gasket, and I'm going to slip the manifold back up onto the head. May have to deal with the clamp underneath the car as far as lining it up and putting the manifold on at the same time. Just depends on what's underneath of it. But I'm going to give it a shot and stick it back on there and put the nuts on it. I believe they tightened down to 14 foot-pounds. I used a jack stand to hold the exhaust pipe up while I pushed it onto the studs. I've tightened those bolts down. I waited a little bit and went over and checked them again. The gasket will settle and the center ones will be loose again. And I'm going to go ahead and install the oxygen sensor and plug it in. And don't forget to feed it through the heat shield, the wire, in case it's hard to get off of it, the heat shield. I put just a little touch of never seize on these heat shield bolts so they don't break off if I have to go in here again. And I'm going to go ahead and install them. They're about 12 foot-pounds. And put that lower catalytic converter bracket to engine mount bolt through, and it's about 28 foot-pounds. Feel free to stick the upper radiator hose on at any time. It's looking pretty good. Now the final piece of the puzzle is to select an intake gasket and install it. I'm using one with copper sealing rings around the water jacket. Since this gasket that was on it had a metal sealing ring around it, the other hole is not used on this model. So I know that this goes on this corner with the water jacket. One single hole. Now I'm going to install it accordingly and start slipping the intake nuts on there. They tighten down to 17 foot-pounds, and put the one single mount bolt back up underneath the intake before fully tighten all the bolts down, just in case I need to adjust it for clearance, lining it up. Slip the coolant bypass hoses back onto that throttle body preheater nipples. And also don't forget there's a little evap vacuum line underneath those two little antifreeze lines. Okay, it looks good. Moving right along, feel free to put the ground cable back on the corner if equipped, and tighten any other manifold clamp bolts, whatever. And we'll take the throttle cable and reattach it and feed it through its holder here and feed it through this eyelet around to this part, and adjust the should have left one of the nuts alone, so the cable should just have a little bit of slack in it, not pulling the throttle open or anything. It's got a 10mm here, a little clip here, and lock the nuts together here on this bracket. And feed it through the hole provided for the cable end. sure the cable's got some slack in it so it's not holding the throttle open. And lock these two 12mm nuts together. And attach the cable at any other points. Next I'll be sticking the air cleaner on. Make sure there's nothing down in there. I'll even look down in. Make sure there's nothing in there. And that's pretty much reverse of removal. It's just got a clamp, holds it here, and then it's mounted at a 10mm there. And plug the air temperature sensor back into it. Bottom part right there. Looks pretty good. You may want to rotate the motor by hand, 4 or 5 revolutions, make sure something didn't go wrong or something fell down in there. You never know. And make sure the drain's closed on the radiator, and I'm going to fill it up with antifreeze. And if you just turn the crankshaft, make sure you take the socket off with a dampener. Wouldn't be very good. Should be good to go. And I suppose I'll start it up and see how it does. Sounds alright. Check for leaks now. Held about a gallon and a quart of antifreeze. Do it. As long as you don't have any leaks and the radiator hose isn't real hard after the first few minutes of running, it should be in business. Good. Good to go. Take it for a little drive.